when you're staking a tree, have the stakes far away from the tree. On a tree this size, as the roots develop and they grow out, you don't want them to bump into the stakes. You don't want roots growing around a stake or girdling a stake. Stakes can cause problems. Most landscapers that use this two-stake system, they put the stakes right next to the tree, like right up here. That's how they do it, about 6 inches away from the tree. I've seen them even closer, 4 inches away from the tree, and they put them in really close. And there's a reason why they do that. It's because they're being lazy. 95% of landscapers do it like this. That's how they plant trees. They're being lazy because first of all, they don't put the tree in a bed. They put the tree in a hole, like a post hole. So they put the tree in a narrow post hole about that big around. And then guess what? The soil is hard around there. So guess where they want to put the stake, where it's easy for them to drive it in the same hole that they made for the tree, which is a narrow hole. So that's why the stakes are so close. And those guys do it all the time, because I go to landscaped areas, I go up to people's homes and I look at the trees to see how the roots are taking. And they always have the stakes super close because they want to drive the stakes into the same narrow post hole that they made, because it's easy. Because if they put the stakes out here, where if you're doing the double stake system, for a tree like this, the stake should be out here, about a foot away from the tree, a foot away on this side and a foot away on that side, measuring radially from the center out a foot. Now, of course, if you have a bigger tree with a larger root spread, then you want the stakes even further. I just do it by eye. But if you divide 360 by 3, that would be 120, right? You know, these little mallets are way more handy than a big long sledgehammer, because you can have more control over it. I got a branch right here that's growing here, and it's making contact with this other one. They're competing. I'm gonna take off the smaller one. Now, for pruning these trees, you could prune this tree for shape and select 3 main leaders right now. You could do it. I don't recommend it. There's a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a shock to the tree. The tree just got planted. The roots on this tree have been severely cut. This tree is in trauma. I just cut that one branch off because it just had to go right here. I've got a broken twig. Take that guy off. And I'm tempted to prune one of these off. This, one of these leaders right here at the top, because I'm going to have 2 codominant stems right there, and I don't really want 2 codominant stems side by side. And I don't think it'll hurt the tree at this stage if I take one of those out. Part of me wants to leave that vertical one in, because from a structural point of view, that seems better. Anyways, you can get really philosophical when you start pruning. The thing is, don't take off anything that you can't put back on with regret. I don't regret the ones that I've taken off. So I like using this green gardening tape. It's very weak, and that's what you want. It'll be gentle on the tree and it won't leave any scars. A lot of the commercial landscaper guys use this really heavy duty stuff, like this really strong stuff. I've seen this stuff that looks like it's made out of conveyor belts, like old conveyor belt material that's been made into strips. It's like super strong, and I've seen it scar trees all the time. Like, I've been to new construction where people have put in trees, and I look at the stuff that they use, and a couple years later, people leave the stakes in. They don't realize the stakes should be taken out in about 2 or 3 years, once the roots have developed a strong attachment point. Unless you live in some place with super high winds, then you would want to use guy wires, not a stake right up against a tree. That's not good for the tree to have a stake, especially a steel stake. The worst stakes people can use are those T stakes, those metal T stakes. The roots will grow around those bumps, and that flange, that blade-shaped flange thing that goes down in the ground, the roots will grow around that and you'll never get the thing out. And the roots will girdle around, and then you're going to have this metal like embedded in the side of your tree. But I always use wooden stakes or bamboo or whatever. And this stuff, I get the thicker. They usually sell this in thin and thick. You can get like two different. And I like the wider one. I guess this is 3/4, or is this an inch? No, this is 3/4 of an inch. And they make a heavy duty, the double thick, and I like the heavy duty. And so this is what I do with it. First of all, I just take off a piece, an arm width. It's at about 5 feet. And I go around the tree. You can tie off with whatever kind of knot you know. If all you know is a granny knot, then go ahead and tie off with a granny knot. But what I do is I use a clove hitch. And then I go around. You don't want to pull too tight. You want to pull real loose, because I don't want to change the angle of the tree.
And if you don't know how to tie a clove hitch, no big worries there. Just wrap around the stake about 3 times, nice and snug, and that will keep your green tape from sliding down the stake and losing your position of attachment point. And the reason that's an issue is because you don't want your one wrap you do around the tree to be very tight. You want it to be just loosely holding, because you're going to be holding from 3 different angles. And you want it to loosely hold the tree because you want the tree to have freedom to move. I'll explain more of that later.
I'll just tie it off there. And my teacher that taught me this, she's a really good green thumb. She was teaching out of college. It was a junior college. She went to UC Davis, got her degree in arboriculture there. She was teaching a class at Sierra Junior College. Patty Keel. She told me to leave these kind of loose. You want to leave them as loose as you can, but still giving support. You don't want to have them really tight, because you want the tree to move around freely, but you don't want it to move around so much that it'll fall over. The whole point of the staking system is to keep the tree from falling over. But you don't want to hold it too rigidly, because you want the tree to move in the wind a little bit. Why? Because that will develop the root system to be stronger. If the tree is held too tightly, that actually makes the tree weak. It's just like if you put your arm in a cast, the bones in your arm would get weak, because that's called atrophy. They would go into atrophy because they're being held too tight. Just enough to hold it, but you don't want to bind it. You don't want the tree to be, being bound. You want the tree to be supported, to have some support and protection. I feel like this one's a little bit too tight. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this, because I think I did that a little bit too tight. So these all have a little bit of slack in them. They're not pulled tight. They're just, and see, commercial landscapers are never going to do this. And I can understand their point of view, because they're like, look, man, we're working on a construction site. We got clueless homeowners. We got out of control wild kids. We got vandalism nowadays. And people are going to come up and just break these. And maybe that's true, but hopefully in a home garden, when you go through all this work, you can be smart enough to not come out here and be like, running, using this like a football field or something, having people running around. Be respectful of this area. And these are just really loose. They're just here to hold it, because I want this tree to move around. Because the more it moves around, it'll make the roots go, oh, whoa, whoa, hey, we got to develop stronger. We're getting moved. And so the roots will grow out and become stronger. If the tree is held super tight, the roots aren't going to get as strong. And the trunk won't get as strong. the trunk and the roots are going to get stronger when it moves. Now it's winter time, and we're still going to get more rain, and I don't really need to water that much, but the reason why I'm going to water isn't just to give the tree water, which it needs, but the soil's all wet around here. I'm still going to water because the watering also helps pack the soil down. Okay, I can see my root crown right here is exposed right here, so I need to remediate that. I've planted these many times, and they always settle down, especially with the way I fluffed it up. In sandy soil, it's gonna settle down even more, even faster.
And a better thing to use would be a watering wand. Those shower head things that you can get for the end of a garden hose that makes a nice fine spray. That way it doesn't blast the soil away from the base of the tree. I don't want to blast away where the root crown is covered by soil. I don't want it to be exposed to the sun.
Now I'm going to do one more step. This is the way I do it. When you first plant a tree, it's okay to water right up against the trunk because it needs water there. The roots are in trauma. The roots need to stay damp and moist. And you want to keep it wet for the first. And this time of year, it's not as critical because it's wintertime, we're having rains, but in the summer you would want to come out and make sure it was, every couple of days. If you have really sandy soil, you might want to come out every day and just spray a little bit of water there to protect the roots from drying out. But you don't want to drown the roots. That's another reason for having this elevated. You don't want the roots submerged in water where it doesn't drain. Good soil, good loamy soil is the best. When the water drains out, it creates little pores and air will get drawn down into the soil. Fresh air as the water sinks, little micropores and little channels, open channels in the soil will open up and allow air to get down there. That's what the roots need. The roots breathe. That's an important point I didn't bring up yet. The roots breathe, but you don't want them to dry out. They don't breathe in the same way that these guys, the upper part of the tree is made to exist in the upper atmosphere. The roots are made to dwell in the soil, but they still need air. So you don't want them to dry out completely. You want them to be damp and moist, but you want them to have air. So if you have super clay soil, super fine clay soil, you really need to elevate your trees when you plant them because that soil doesn't breathe very good because it's so fine and compacted with fine clay that it just gets wet and it becomes like a solid plastic material. It's not very porous. So if you elevate it, you give the roots a little more of a chance of the soil has to drain and dry out, but not completely dry out. You don't want it as dry as the desert, So thinking of your soil, learning about soil is a good thing. You should learn more about soil, drainage, moisture retention, clay, sand, loam, what all that means. Do research on that, on loam, sandy loam, clay soils. Sandy soil is good for certain things, but it needs a lot more water all the time. So people have to keep adding organic matter to it. This clay soil here, it doesn't breathe as good. See, here's the volcanic pumice. It's like grains of rock salt in here. There's not very much. I wish there was like 10 times as much pumice in here. I want a lot of pumice in here. This isn't very much. They call this vermiculite. It's pretty useful. It's light. It doesn't compact too much. It prevents soil compaction. It helps reduce the damages from soil compaction. At first, when you first plant the tree for the first couple months, it's okay to keep this wet all the time. But especially if your tree is level with the grade. You don't want to just water right here. You really want to water out here in the drip line. The drip line is the outermost line. And see, these branches, like this branch right here on this side, if I took a plumb bob and held it right here and let it hang, the string line would drop right about here. And this branch right here, the string would drop right about here. So out here is the drip line on this young tree. And by the end of this spring, the drip line will be way out here because these branches will have grown and extended. And that's where you really want to keep it wet, because once the roots get developed and they're starting to grow, you really want to water out here more on the drip line. So I'm going to make a toroid around this tree.
Now I don't make a really deep ditch when I make my moat around here, just enough to hold a ring of water around the tree so the roots will have something to grow towards. Here I'm reinforcing the wall of the toroidal moat around by scraping up some soil, raking it up around the outside, going around. And the main thing is, in the first 6 months, throughout the summer, this is a new tree. This is springtime right now. Well, this is winter when I'm planting this. But make sure that that mound is kept damp so that way it never dries out. But you really want the bulk of your water to be out around the drip line in that circle that I just made. That will stimulate the roots to grow out towards that area. That's what you want.
And the roots are going to go where they sense water. That's another thing. If you water around the trunk, the roots won't be motivated to grow out. If they're getting all the water right here, not only will that induce rot, it will also induce laziness on the root system, because the root system won't be like, they'll be going, hey, we're getting tons of water. We don't need to grow out. But when the water's out here and it senses dryness here, I don't want it to sense dryness now because I just transplanted it and it's going through trauma and it needs to be watered. But once I get to summer, I'll still water this to try to keep it slightly moist and put potting soil or wood chips on here. They're good decomposed ones to keep the roots covered. But by watering out here and keeping this soaked out here on the drip line, the roots are going to go, hey man, there's water out there. And they're going to grow out there and try to get that water. And that's going to make the tree stronger because you want the roots to grow out. Right? Now see, like after 3 years, and this tree has established itself, I won't need the torus here, and I won't need the mound to be quite so high. This mound is going to settle down over the next year. And this toroid will slowly disappear. But I can use it with the new tree to water. But hopefully you guys get the basic idea. The staking, the water, the root crown. Now you want to be careful if you water or you have somebody, hey Bobby, can you go out and water the trees? Well, little Bobby doesn't know, or little Susie doesn't know that when they spray with the hose, and they like to sit there and spray, and they shoot the trunk and they aim for here. You don't want to aim for here and blast this when you're watering. You want to be gentle. You don't want to take the hose and shoot this with a water gun, Because see the roots, they're right here. I want the roots to be covered. Now this is kind of hyper elevated, but it's going to settle down. So you want to come out and check. If you see that the roots are exposed, grab some soil and put it over. I'm going to put a little bit of clay soil here because the clay will hold better than the potting soil. The problem with the potting soil is it's loose and flaky and it'll just come off.
Okay, now later on this summer, I'll probably dispense with the torus, the moat around there. I'll just rake the dirt smooth, and the area around the root crown will be slightly elevated, and I'll just water around the base of the tree. I might leave a slight impression of the torus to retain water, but eventually it won't really need it. This is just for the beginning part of the tree.
Like look at that Montmorency cherry right here. That thing That thing is so well established, and because it's short and stocky right now, that Montmorency cherry, it doesn't need stakes. And quite frankly, any stakes around it would just impede its growth and be detrimental to it. It's detrimental to the root system and the branches. Here, I'm going to go ahead and use the rest of the potting soil. Because I know that the more this is watered, it's going to wash off and try to expose the roots. So I'm going to extra cover it